Being nominated for the Kennedy Center Honors is only a testament to the fact that you are among the best musicians the United States has ever produced. It's obvious that George Strait's title as King of Country wasn't an accident. George is in the news in 2025 for more reasons than just adding another honor to the hundreds he already possesses. The King of Country has been busy, from hanging out with flood victims to squabbling with a famous person, and then almost escaping a near-fatal health crisis, beginning with a list made public on August 13. It came directly from the president's office and included the names of rock band Kiss, singer Gloria Gaynor, Broadway star Michael Crawford, actor Sylvester Stallone, and our own country great George Strait. As it happened, these were the recipients of the 48th Annual Kennedy Center Honors, which were held in December 2025. Each of these honorees had an award-winning career and were themselves excellent individuals who had worked hard to become significant. George Strait, who is currently 73, began recording in 1981 and amassed a dozen #1 country singles in a short period of time. He was already the most nominated person in the history of the Country Music Awards by 1998. He kept putting out fantastic songs, and the Academy of Country Music eventually crowned him the artist of the first decade of the 2000s. Therefore, it doesn't come as a huge surprise to us fans that the King of Country will still be recognized in 2025. George's passion is music. Raw, hardcore country music was essentially introduced to the world by this man. Cowboys and Dreamers, his 30 Honest studio album, was only released last year. George is still living the good life at the age of 70 or so, while other cowboys are relaxing on ranches. Fans are quite happy that he continues to do a few concerts, even though he said more than 10 years ago that he would no longer be touring extensively. We are grateful for George's amazing contribution to music. His more giving nature, however, is not well known. You can attest to the tremendous amount of work George and Vaqueros del Mar put into gathering money to assist families, if you are familiar with the Hill Country flooding relief effort. On July 27, the team hosted a small donor dinner and music called Straight to the Heart. Over $6 million was raised for the flood victims in the Hill Country. George begged for everyone's prayers for a speedy end to the suffering of so many people, despite his gratitude for the humanity displayed by those there. While some were practically drowning in agony, fans were grateful that someone like George was using his position to help, instead of enriching himself. However, it should come as no surprise to anyone familiar with George's background that he is making the decision to help others as much as possible. George was born in 1952 in the little Texas town of Poteet, but his upbringing was very different from the fame that comes with becoming a successful musician. In addition to managing acres of a ranch that had been in the family for a long time, his father, John Strait, taught math at a middle school. George's parents divorced while he was still in elementary school. Raised by their father, he and his brother Buddy assisted with ranch chores from an early age. The two boys learned the virtues of the rural West while spending a significant amount of time on the ranch. He was defined by his life on his family's ranch. Responsibilities were mandatory, and sunrise meant chores before school. It was a way of life, and it appeared like George and his brother would live this way for many more decades to come. But George didn't start taking music more seriously until he was still in high school. Many of his peers followed the rock and roll sound that dominated the airwaves in the 1960s. He claims that at the time, the Beatles were all that mattered to him. As he puts it, the Beatles were big. I listened to them a lot, and that whole bunch of groups that were popular then. George would go on to play with a rock group named the Stoics, who were Beatles fans. However, since it was an experimental time, George felt it was crucial to perform in a few other rock bands as well. In high school, he wasn't even into country music at this point, which was an unusual aspect. He spent a year at Southwest Texas State University, following high school. After that, he secretly wed Norma, his high school girlfriend. In 1971, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. George could never sacrifice music for anything, even if he left his new wife to serve his nation. He resumed singing and playing the guitar while he was in Hawaii, and his musical preferences changed somewhat, but remained centered around guitars. George now went to the honky-tonks, the ancient Texas dance halls, and the music of the open road. Great country musicians like Merle Haggard and Bob Wills, who was well known for Western swing music, were among his favorites. George believed that these men's guitars reflected the spirit of the American West, and their voices reflected the burden of working-class existence. George bravely decided to join his first country music band while still serving in the military. Fortunately for him, There was one called the Rambling Country at the Army installation. His gift was shown here. When George sang country music, his powerfully Texan voice was the ideal combination. Nevertheless, Georgie determined that he needed to get a degree in agriculture, which is the second thing he is most skilled at. He did, however, decide to join the country band Stony Ridge, after seeing a poster for them while he was a student at Southwest Texas State University. It should come as no surprise that he was soon promoted to lead singer. He also changed the band's name to the Ace in the Hole as one of his first actions. And because they played frequently at clubs close to college following their debut performance, they did a fantastic job. Before long, bars as far away as Huntsville and Houston were booking them across South and Central Texas. Locally, the Ace in the Hole gained popularity and even started opening for well-known performers like the Texas Playboys. They were able to record several of George's tunes as a result of this attention. At the time, they collaborated with Records, a small label based in Houston. Sadly, the songs didn't become hits, and George came to the realization that he couldn't devote himself entirely to music, particularly since he had no contacts in the music business. In order to supplement his income, he continued to work on his family's ranch throughout the day. Eventually, some Nashville residents were persuaded to travel to Texas to see George and his band perform by his friend Irv Woolsey, who also owned the club where George's band played. Before starting his bar, Woolsey was employed by a major record label. His guests liked George's music, but they believed a Western swing sound wouldn't be popular. So, without making a bargain, they departed. Like those who had come to see him, some in the business didn't think George's traditional approach could compete with the pop country sound of the moment, so he made numerous visits to Nashville in an attempt to land a record deal, but was turned down by every company. George stuck to the genre's historical origins in spite of Nashville's drive for a more polished pop sound. He created his own unique sound by fusing ballads with swing and dance music. What distinguished him from nearly everyone else was his refusal to follow trends. The challenging aspect was that while his music was not receiving the acclaim it deserved, everyone else was succeeding. George considered giving up music at this point. He was already planning to accept a job offer to construct cattle pens. He had really informed his band that he was leaving, but his wife persuaded him to continue performing for another year. Within that year, George received a recording contract offer from MCA, a prominent label. But according to the deal, they would only release one song at first, and if it was successful, they would consider recording an album and extend their agreement with him. George's single, Unwound, became well known following its publication, and peaked at number 6 on Billboard magazine's Hot Country Songs chart. The tale altered at this point. His professional music career began when MCA offered him a longer deal as a result of Unwound's success. He remained as backup for Ace in the Hole, his band. George and his band never looked back after that. He would go on to amass more #1 hits than any other recording artist in history over the next 40 years, surpassing even Elvis Presley in silence. He turned into a live representation of unadulterated, unwavering country music. Nevertheless, George maintained his modesty in the face of all the accolades, packed stadiums, and innumerable radio successes. He never sought out tabloid attention or showed off his success. George clung to his family, his faith, and the stage, while many of the celebrities around him tumbled into scandal, addiction, or failed marriages. Instead, he decided to live his life as he always had, a quiet guy who rarely spoke and who let the music speak for itself. Tragic events, regrettably, do not discriminate. On a June day in the midst of the 1980s, George experienced the most agonizing pain that would alter his life forever. Jennifer, his 13-year-old daughter, died in a vehicle accident outside of San Marcos, Texas. Gregory Wilson Allen, an 18-year-old from Staples, Texas, was the driver of the vehicle in which she was a passenger. Excessive speed and poor car control led to the collision, which caused the car to topple over. Jennifer, who was not wearing a seatbelt, died instantly after being partially ejected. George was devastated. He changed overnight, according to close friends. He was no longer the man whose laughter could light up a room. George kept to himself, retreating within a shell he was unaware he possessed. Following this catastrophe, George stopped speaking to the media for several years. For a year, he refrained from speaking about Jennifer's death and did not give interviews. Songs like Baby Blue were born in that isolation. Silent odes to the daughter he would never be able to bring back, with subliminal messages of anguish. I became even more private after I lost my daughter. That's when I really shut things down. I didn't feel like talking to anybody that wasn't really close to me, George said after a year. This is how I'm going to do things, because I had the mindset that nothing worse could probably happen. His return was welcomed by his fans. George kept putting out music, and they kept making it into the top 10. He was setting new records, breaking old ones. As if that weren't enough, he began working with Pure Country as an actor. For the film, he also performed a number of well-known songs, including Where the Sidewalk Ends, Heartland, I Cross My Heart, and The King of Broken Hearts. You would think that George would shut down and be done once the globe entered the social media era. This was not true. In 1 year, he received 2 CMA awards, one for Song of the Year and one for Album of the Year. Not to mention the album's Grammy Award. The Academy of Country Music simply had to recognize him as the decade's top musician at this point. George didn't do what you would expect. Okay, now this man had done it all. Perhaps he would retire now. There was one more thing he needed to accomplish. He declared in September 2012 that his Cowboy Rides Away tour, which took place in May 2013 and coincided with the publication of his album Love Is Everything, would be his final one. On that album, one of his singles peaked at #1 on the Billboard charts. George now had 60 #1 hits to his credit. A few artists had never received one at all. On Billboard's Hot Country Songs chart, George has now surpassed Conway Twitty's record of 40 #1 hits. Unbelievably, George now had the most #1 hits on all charts of any performer in any genre of music, not just country music. This was astounding. To be crowned in 2013, for the 3rd time in his career, he was also named Entertainer of the Year by the Country Music Association. With nearly $18 million in revenue, his performance that year also set a record for the biggest revenues at a single country event. This individual was already discussing retirement. However, aging does not spare anyone. Additionally, George's announcement of his retirement rocked Nashville and the music industry as a whole. George acknowledged for the first time in his lengthy career that his stage career is coming to an end. In addition to his advanced age, he had significant health issues that he had concealed from the public. He clarified that he had suffered from decades of touring, innumerable performances, lengthy travel, and the weighty burden of upholding his tremendous legacy. His previously powerful and unrelenting body is starting to show its limitations. He also acknowledged, for the first time in his life, that he can no longer disregard such boundaries. The admission was devastating to many of his admirers, who believed he was unbreakable and unbeatable. It showed that beneath the serene grin and the cowboy hat, there was a man with burdens just like everyone else. However, his announcement went beyond his health. In addition, he disclosed a secret he had kept for almost 40 years. His decision to remain silent following the passing of his only daughter sprang from both shame and grief. He acknowledged that he had felt for a long time that he ought to have done more, been there more, and put up a stronger fight to keep her safe. The truth of a father plagued by regret was a heartbreaking revelation. Fans were left with no choice but to console and cheer the man, the legend. Many were curious about the Cowboys' next move. Was this going to be the end of my career? He had his cherished ranch and grandchildren to keep him busy, and everyone knew he deserved it all. Many fans were unaware that he lived on his own ranch in South Texas, where he raised cattle, rode horses, and participated in team roping at rodeos. Outside of music, he spent a lot of time ranching and team roping. More than 20 years ago, he and his brother Buddy founded a major team roping competition called the George Strait Team Roping Classic, for which he grew steers especially. Additionally, it had been mentioned that the singer did not keep horses and cattle for profit, but rather because he loved doing it. Thus, we all waited anxiously to hear George's decision. During the waiting period, tributes were given by producers, industry insiders, and other musicians, demonstrating the profound impact George had on their careers. G. Brooks acknowledged that there might not have been room for musicians like him if George had not stuck to classic country. George was more than just a peer, according to Reba McEntire. He served as the compass that maintained the authenticity of country music, despite changes in the surrounding environment. He was acknowledged by younger celebrities, such as Luke Bryan and Casey Musgraves, with teaching them that authenticity was something that should never be compromised. Names like Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel made an impression even outside of the nation, describing George as a unique performer who represented more than just music. George could see that he couldn't simply vanish like a magician with such a strong effect. He was needed in music. He so decided to go into a state of semi-retirement, Touring would be entirely up to his whim, and he would release music as he pleased. George's 30 Honest album was released in 2024, and his fans couldn't be happier. On June 15th of the same year, he became the first solo performer to ever have the most fans at a concert in the United States. In front of a huge crowd of more than 110,000 supporters at Kyle Field at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. George accomplished this amazing achievement. Remember that this man is still going strong at the age of 73. George's humanitarian efforts and stadium appearances with Chris Stapleton keep 2025 exciting for him. George has spoken up about the events in the nation and shared his amazing depth of knowledge with as many people as possible. In addition, George, or Grandpa as his grandchildren refer to him, maintains a close relationship with his family, demonstrating to the world that it is possible to have a legendary career that includes decades of #1 hits and accolades that could fill a house without losing oneself.